Data binding is one of the more exciting features that's available to us as web developers, and I like it from multiple standpoints. First off, from a long-term maintenance story, it's much better because you're going to write less code. And that leads to my second point, which is you're going to write less code. By using data binding, you'll see that we can eliminate a lot of the DOM code that we normally have to write if you're using a library, maybe like jQuery or something along those lines, because we don't have to go in and out of a text box all the time. We can wire up a text box to some data and have the framework, AngularJS in this case, take care of things for us. Now, data binding isn't provided natively in JavaScript, of course. I'd argue that one of the libraries that first made this really popular and kind of shot it off into the stratosphere as far as people using it was Knockout. Knockout's a very, very good library for data binding, and that's what it specializes in. In fact, that's all it does, is data binding, and it's very good at it. Well, AngularJS also supports this concept of data binding. Now, if you're new to the concept, in a nutshell, what it means is that if I have a text box and I have some property, we'll say name in this case, then as the text box changes, if I wire these two up appropriately, the name property can automatically be updated. Likewise, when the name property changes, the text box can automatically be updated. Now, that's why if you do this right, you can eliminate a lot of code. Now, this gets us to what I think is the most key point in web development over the last year or two, and that is something I call control-oriented versus data-oriented programming. Most of us over the years have done control-oriented programming. This would be using libraries or vanilla JavaScript to actually write some code to get into a text box, assign the value, and then when they hit a button or lose focus or whatever it is, we then write some code to extract the value out of the text box. So if you have 50 text boxes on a form, you more than likely have around 100 lines of code minimum just to get data in and out. Now, certainly we could refactor some of that and maybe consolidate it, but that's what control-oriented programming is. It's all about the controls. All the controls that have data also have IDs, and it adds a lot of extra code into the process. Now, data-oriented programming is very different and much more productive. Data-oriented programming means I don't even need to put IDs on my controls, like my text boxes, my selects, or others. Instead, I'm going to wire up a property to a control. As the property changes, the control changes, and vice versa, just as we talked about. Now, the difference here is that instead of writing all that code to push values in and pull them out of controls and having to put IDs on controls and things like that, with data-oriented programming, I leverage a framework, whether it's Knockout, AngularJS, or others. Now, let's walk through a workflow then of control-oriented, and then we'll also compare and contrast that with data-oriented development. So in the control-oriented workflow, which is probably what you've done, I know it's what I had done for many years until this data binding type of concept came out. When the user actually loads up the page, we're going to write some code that goes and finds our text box. So we'll say in this case it's called name, and we're going to assign a value into that text box. So that'd kind of be step one. We got to write that code. The next piece is the user modifies the data, so they go in and change it to maybe Jane Doe. And they then click a button. Now we're going to have to handle the button click, of course, and you'll do that regardless of the framework. We need to know when they click something. But we also are going to have to write code again to actually extract the value out of that text box and then store it maybe in a property or variable. Now in the data-oriented development workflow, things change quite a bit because now we don't need to actually put data in and grab it out. We can wire up the data to the control and then just have them magically kind of live in harmony, if you will. And as one is changed, the other changes. Very, very productive if you haven't done it before. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to bind to a property, in this case called name. Now this is kind of a pseudo type syntax. It's not what you do in Angular. In fact, you've already seen ng model. But we have some type of a syntax that says bind to the property called name. Now the user modifies the data. The property is now automatically updated, either when they lose focus or maybe even when they type and change the data. It really depends on the framework there. Now there's a big difference here, of course, between the control-oriented that requires IDs and a lot of code to get data in and out, and the data-oriented development workflow, which leverages frameworks or libraries. A library would be one like Knockout. A framework would be AngularJS. And by leveraging these frameworks or libraries, we don't have to write all that code to get data in and out. It's much more productive and much better down the road for maintenance. So that's a quick look at how data binding works and the different approaches out there for getting data in and out of controls.